Hey everyone, I'm Your Name from Now You, and let's be real, constitutional law isn't exactly known for being a laugh riot. The Indian Constitution, adopted on the 26th of November 1949, is a masterpiece of governance, democracy, and adaptability. Let's uncover the fascinating story of these borrowed features.
Alright. Before we go globe-trotting for constitutional inspiration, let's start in India. The Government of India Act of 1935 laid the groundwork for some key parts of our constitution. We're talking the federal scheme, the whole idea of power sharing between the centre and states. And then there's the office of the governor, you know, the big cheese in each state. The judiciary, the folks in black robes making sure laws are followed. The Act set up their framework too. Public service commissions, those folks who make sure government jobs go to qualified people, that was in the Act. So, yeah, the Government of India Act, 1935, not the most glamorous title, but it was a huge influence on India's constitution.
Okay, time to hop over to the land of kangaroos and didgeridoos, Australia. Now, when you think of Australia and India, you might think of cricket rivalries, not constitutional similarities. But hold on, because we borrowed some pretty important stuff from down under. First up, the concurrent list. Imagine a grocery list, but instead of milk and eggs, it's got subjects that both the central government and state governments can make laws about. Next, let's talk about freedom of trade, commerce, and just plain old moving around. And finally, picture this. The parliament is deadlocked. The Lok Sabha says yes, the Rajya Sabha says no. What happens? Thanks to Australia, we've got a solution, a joint sitting of parliament.
All right, next stop on our constitutional world tour, Canada. Now, India and Canada might seem worlds apart, but when it comes to governing a vast and diverse country, we found some common ground. First and foremost, Canada's a federal state, just like India. That means we've got a central government and state governments, each with their own powers. And just like Canada, India's constitution gives the central government a bit more muscle. Now remember those residuary powers we talked about, the ones that cover anything not specifically listed in the Constitution? Well, in both India and Canada, those powers belong to the center. And speaking of the center, guess who gets to appoint the governors of each state? You guessed it, the big guys and gals in the central government. Ever wondered what happens when there's a tricky legal question that needs a really smart answer? Both India and Canada have Supreme Courts with advisory jurisdiction. That means they can give their expert opinions on important matters.
All right, let's hop across the pond to the Emerald Isle, Ireland. And no, we're not here for leprechauns or pots of gold, though that would be pretty cool. We're here for some serious constitutional inspiration. See, Ireland gave us some big ideas about what a government should strive for. We're talking about the directive principles of state policy, these guiding principles that tell the government, hey, here's what you should aim for when you're making laws and policies. And then there's the Rajya Sabha, our upper house of parliament. Ever wonder how some of those folks get their seats? Well, Ireland gave us the idea of nominations. Oh, and while we're on the topic of elections, how do you choose the president of a massive, diverse country like India? Ireland had a pretty good system, so we borrowed it.
Next stop on our constitutional world tour, Japan. Now you might be thinking, what could India with its ancient traditions possibly learn from Japan? Well, it turns out quite a bit. India borrowed the concept of procedure established by law from Japan. It's a bit of a mouthful, but basically it means that the government can't just do whatever it wants. Every action, every decision, has to be backed up by a clear legal process. This is huge for protecting individual rights. It means you can't be arrested or have your property taken away without a fair and legal process. It's like having a constitutional safety net, making sure the government plays by the rules.
Okay, time to head over to the Soviet Union, which I know might seem like a surprising source of inspiration for the Indian Constitution. After all, we were all about democracy, and well, the Soviet Union not so much. But even seemingly opposite systems can learn from each other. Take fundamental duties, for example. These are the things that we, as citizens, are expected to do for our country, like respecting the national flag, preserving our cultural heritage, that kind of stuff. And guess where we got that idea? Yep, the Soviet Constitution. Our fundamental duties are all about promoting unity and civic responsibility, not blindly following the state. And speaking of things we borrowed but made our own, let's talk about the preamble to our Constitution. Tucked away in that inspiring language are ideals of social, economic, and political justice.
All right, time to talk about the elephant in the room. Or should I say, the former colonizer in the subcontinent, the United Kingdom. Now, Our relationship with Britain is complicated, to say the least, but there's no denying that their legal and political systems had a huge influence on India. First and foremost, we borrowed their whole parliamentary system of government. You know, the government is accountable to the people's elected representatives thing, yeah, that's a British invention. And it's a pretty good one if you ask me. Then there's the rule of law, this fundamental principle that no one is above the law, not even the government. It's the bedrock of a just and fair society, and it's something we inherited from the British. But the borrowing didn't stop there. We adopted their legislative procedures, the whole process for making laws, debating them, amending them, all that good stuff. And we also borrowed the concept of single citizenship. That means no matter where you're from in India, you're a citizen of the whole country. Oh, and let's not forget the cabinet system, those trusty advisors to the Prime Minister.
Okay, get ready for a transatlantic trip to the land of the free and the home of the brave, the United States of America. Now, India and the US might have taken different paths after independence, but when it came to drafting our Constitution, we definitely looked to America for inspiration. First and foremost, we borrowed the idea of fundamental rights. You know, those inalienable rights that every human being has, regardless of who they are or where they're from. Things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to equality. Yeah, those are pretty important. And guess what else we borrowed? Judicial review. That's the power of the courts to strike down laws that violate the Constitution. It's like having a constitutional referee, making sure everyone plays by the rules. But wait, there's more. We also adopted the American model of an independent judiciary. That means judges are appointed, not elected, and they can't be fired for making unpopular decisions. It helps ensure that justice is blind and impartial. And speaking of things we borrowed from the US, let's not forget about impeachment procedures for the president, you know, just in case things go really south. And while we're at it, we also borrowed their system for removing judges. It's all about accountability, folks.
Okay, this next stop on our Constitutional World Tour is a bit of a somber one, Germany's Weimar Republic. Now, the Weimar Republic is often remembered for its instability and its eventual collapse into Nazi dictatorship, but it also had a surprisingly progressive constitution. And there's one particular area where India learned a valuable lesson. See, the Weimar Constitution had provisions for suspending fundamental rights during emergencies. The idea was that in times of crisis, the government needed extra powers to maintain order. But as history tragically showed, these emergency powers could be abused, and they paved the way for authoritarianism. Now India also has provisions for suspending fundamental rights during emergencies. But thanks to the lessons of the Weimar Republic, we made sure to put in strong safeguards to prevent abuse.
All right, last stop on our Constitutional World Tour, South Africa. Now, India and South Africa have a lot in common. We both fought long and hard for freedom from colonial rule, and we both emerged as diverse democracies. So it's no surprise that we borrowed a few ideas from each other's constitutions. First up, let's talk about constitutional amendments. See, constitutions aren't supposed to be set in stone. They need to be flexible enough to adapt to changing times. But changing a constitution is also a big deal, so you need a clear and robust process. South Africa's constitution had a pretty good process for amendments, so we borrowed it. It involves a supermajority vote in parliament and sometimes even approval from state legislatures. This ensures that any changes to the constitution have broad-based support. And speaking of the Rajya Sabha, remember how we talked about how some members are nominated and some are elected? Well, the way those elections are conducted, yeah, we got that idea from South Africa too. It's a system designed to give states a voice in the national legislature.
So, as we wrap up our whirlwind tour of constitutional inspiration, it's clear that the Indian Constitution is not just a document, it's a tapestry woven from threads gathered from all over the world. We borrowed freely, but we always adapted what we borrowed to fit our own unique circumstances. By learning from global experiences and adapting them to Indian realities, our Constitution stands as a beacon of resilience and inclusivity. Indian Constitution inspired by the world, made for India.